You are listening to episode 9 of the Psoriasis podcast with Alisha Bridges. Welcome back to series 1 of the Psoriasis podcast, where we are talking about the key elements that we need to master in order to live well with psoriasis. Today we are talking to Alisha Bridges, and we're talking about a topic close to my heart, how to work well with your dermatologist. Now, if you listen to episode 4, you will have heard me talk to GP Dan Maggs, and you know that I have had the occasional suboptimal experience. Now, Alisha's always been my number one choice for this. She's an information powerhouse. She is a marketing professional, and she applies her skills to advocate for psoriasis. So in World Psoriasis Day last year, I decided that I wanted to make a difference. And Alisha was the first person I came into contact with. That girl is all over Twitter. So if you are interested in following her, I will make sure I put the links to her social media on the page for this episode. She also has a blog, Being Me in My Own Skin, which is excellent, and I highly recommend you check that out. She's also involved in research with the National Psoriasis Foundation and many, many, many other things that I shan't list here. So welcome to the show, Alisha.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited about our conversation today.
Now, I know that your story is quite similar to mine. You developed psoriasis from an early age. Should we talk about how psoriasis has affected you and how that's led to where you are now?
Yes. So I first encountered psoriasis when I was 7 years old. It came after I had a case of chickenpox, which was very common when I was younger in the late 80s, early 90s. My grandmother noticed that the typical chickenpox scars that people get after the virus goes away, they weren't healing correctly. So she took me to the dermatologist, who then determined that I had psoriasis. And I've dealt with it for, at this point, over 2 decades. And up until about 3 or 4 years ago, I was 90% covered. So the only thing that really wasn't affected was my face. And even I had to deal with that on and off. So it's been a really interesting journey with this condition.
What led you to start blogging? Because I assume that was where your online presence kind of started.
Yes. So for years, I lived in shame with psoriasis. I didn't want to talk about it. I lied about my condition. I hid it from people. And probably about 8 years ago, I was online and I was just looking for resources and support. And I came across Talk Psoriasis, which is an online support group for people living with the condition. And I started to write on the forums there. And I wrote something called my suicide letter. Now, it was not about an actual physical death, but in the letter, I outlined how psoriasis controlled my life. And I guess I would compare psoriasis with almost like an abusive relationship. Like, it controlled me. It told me what I could and couldn't wear, where I could and couldn't go. And it just really affected my self-esteem. So in that letter, I talked about killing parts of myself, which included the low self-esteem, the lack of self-love, the belief that I wouldn't be able to find love, killing those ideals so that I could truly live a fruitful life with this disease. And so many people were touched by the letter that they sent it to the National Psoriasis Foundation, who then in turn invited me to a volunteer conference that was going on the following year. And at that volunteer conference, they had a workshop about blogging and telling your story online. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can do that. And that's how it started.
Wow, that's amazing. So you talk about the lack of self-love. Is that something that you helped? Is that something blogging helped with?
So the blogging helped in a sense, because I realized a lot of the ideals and thoughts that I had, that people wouldn't love me, that they wouldn't be accepting. The blogging showed me that that was a lie. and that a lot of these insecurities that I was feeling was really internal, and my self-consciousness coming out because of psoriasis. Now, don't get me wrong, I've encountered a lot of rude people, a lot of negative people, but the love and the support that I've received from people overshadow any hate or any nasty or negative comments that I have received from anyone else. And honestly, I've had people come to bat for me in droves when someone has been negative. So the blogging has really showed me that people love me. And so that in turn helped me to find a love for myself that I didn't have before.
Do you think people who are struggling living with psoriasis should get some of the support from medical staff, or do you think taking to reading people's blogs and using social media is a better way?
So what I found is there's no better support than someone who can relate directly to you. So I think the best support is finding a psoriasis community with faces and people just like you, with people who are living with the disease or parents who are raising children with the disease. That's some of the best support that you can find. I do feel as though the medical community also has a responsibility in supporting those of us with psoriasis, but assessing the mental and emotional components of the disease is something that's very new for physicians. And it's a new realm for them because for years, our mental and emotional health has been neglected by the medical community because they've been so focused on treating the disease, but not the whole body. So although medical professionals can be very helpful and helping those of us with this disease in different areas, mental and emotional support is going to be found best from those who also have the disease.
We talked to Todd Bellow, who I know you know. I think he was in episode 5, and we talked about the importance of community. So that's...
Yes.
Yeah.
He's the best person to talk about that with his Overcoming Psoriasis support group. I love Todd like a brother. He's a brother from another mother. So
he's great. So in terms of bridging that relationship with medical professionals, so in your experience, they're only just catching up now with some of the psychological challenges. I know that you've done some work in this kind of area, haven't you? Working with pharmaceutical companies, talking about patient experiences to try to help doctors and the pharmaceutical companies understand some of the challenges we face. Do you think that's been beneficial?
So I've definitely believed that it's been beneficial, and the medical community ideals on mental health and emotional health is never going to change if we continue to remain silent. So I definitely try my best to express the emotional and mental component because it goes neglected. Even when I was growing up as a child, even with the people around me, the adults, my family, they were so focused on treating the disease that they didn't realize how much this disease was taking a toll on my mental health. And because mental health a lot of times is invisible, or a lot of times when we express issues in those areas, they are mistaken for something else. Just like I would have anxiety attacks. Well, people thought that I was irritable or being a nasty attitude teenager, when in the inside, I literally was having a meltdown because of different situations with psoriasis. But because those things cannot be seen, if we as psoriasis patients don't work to verbalize these things to the medical community and to get them to get it and to demand that our mental health is assessed and that this becomes an important part that they look at for this disease, it will continue to go under the table and neglected. So I definitely work with pharmaceutical companies as well as doctors and researchers to make sure that I'm one of the voices enforcing that the mental component of this disease is just as detrimental as the physical component.
Absolutely. So in appointments I've had with dermatologists, the furthest my mental health assessment has ever gone is, are you okay? In these situations, how would a person go about initiating a conversation about the fact that they're not okay? Purely because we are trained by society to respond to that question with yes. So my automatic
Correct.
response was yes, even though I absolutely was not okay. I had no idea how to move from that place where I'd been protecting myself and lying to everybody I knew to opening up and answering honestly.
So this is a common problem that I see within the medical community that needs to change. And I think that they need to, when you walk in and you do your paperwork, I think there needs to be a part where they assist a person's mental health. It has to be more than how are you doing today? Because as you said, that's just a common phrase that you say just to be nice, and the person usually responds with, I'm fine or I'm okay, even though when deep down inside they may not feel that way. Now, with working with a lot of doctors, the challenge that they face in assessing the mental health side is, well, I'm not a psychologist, so I shouldn't have to worry about that kind of stuff. And what I say to that is, we're not asking dermatologists to be our counselors, therapists, or psychologists. But what we are asking is that they assess the mental component of the disease and then refer if they need to. Just like if someone came in a dermatologist's office and said, you know what, I'm feeling joint pain. And then that dermatologist will say, okay, well, where's the joint pain? Well, it sounds to me that you might be dealing with psoriatic disease. I can't see you for that, but I'm going to refer you to a rheumatologist. That's how it will work. That's exactly what they need to do with the mental health component of it. And so with patients, people living with psoriasis, your responsibility is to advocate for yourself. Even if the doctor is not asking you those questions, you need to be in your doctor's face telling them, look, I'm having a hard time right now. This disease is affecting my work. It's affecting my relationships. What is it that we can do? You and your doctor works together as a team. If I'm having a problem in a romantic relationship that me and my partner can't get together, then we outsource someone else to help us. But we talk about it. And so that's what you have to do with your doctor. Both of you all are responsible for your health. So it's a team effort.
Quite often people have negative relationships with a dermatologist. Now, I think the system works slightly differently in the US. Is that correct? Can you choose whichever dermatologist you want to see, or you normally referred to a specific person by your doctor?
So it works in a couple of different ways, and it's really based upon insurance. It depends on what your insurance requires. Some insurance companies require you to go to a general physician first, and then you're referred to a specialist such as a dermatologist. Now, if you want to go to whatever dermatologist you want, that's possible. But most times, if you do that, your insurance won't honor it, and then you have to pay for it out of pocket.
Okay.
So it really just depends on the insurance company.
Okay, so a similar situation then. If you're following the rules and you want financial assistance, you go with who has been allocated to you.
Mm-hmm.
In that situation, if you have a dermatologist and you just find really hard to talk to, they're very old school, they're not really into this whole, conversational kind of consultation. I know quite a few are still in this paternalistic, didactic, they tell you what you need and then you leave. Do you have any tips on how you could try and either improve that relationship, or is it best to submit a complaint letter and try and move on somewhere else?
So there's a couple of different options, and it just kind of depends on what you're comfortable with. So if there is a doctor in the office that you feel like is not necessarily listening to you, one, of course, you can express that. Two, maybe you can deal with other staff like physician assistants. We have physician assistants in the U.S. That go through a similar process as doctors. And a lot of times now when I go see my dermatologist, I don't even see her. I see her physician assistant. which is also able to write prescriptions. So that is another option, or the nurse practitioner. So they're just as capable as the doctor to help assess your needs. And if there is an issue where you have a concern that they're not familiar with, then they can go talk to the doctor to see what is best for you. So that is one option. If you're in an area where there aren't a lot of different options for doctors, then maybe you can deal with their physician assistant or nurse practitioner. The other option is always to go find another doctor. I know that that's not possible for everyone because of insurance challenges, as well as depending on the area you live in. But your relationship with your doctor is not a dictatorship. They don't demand or tell you what it is that you're going to do. You work together in order to find the treatment that is not only going to be the best for you, but the most convenient, whatever that is in your head. And so you have that right to advocate and to speak up for yourself. So I want to make sure I say that. The other option, which is very new, is I think they call it dermatology, where you do video chat with your dermatologist. The cool thing, not the cool thing, but the advantage about our disease is it's visual. So a lot of the things that are assessed really only have to be done with the eye. And if there are tests and stuff that need to be done, you can do that. But a lot of it is visual. And so that's something new that's happening that I think in the next 5 to 10 years is going to be really popular. And so there are some doctors' offices who are getting to that now. But if you don't have any doctors in your area, teledermatology, the video chat, will make it easier for you to assess doctors around the world opposed to just in your immediate area.
Are there any other top tips that you would give for someone who is going to see their dermatology? So I know in the past, one of the problems I had was I'd have lots of questions. I'd get to my appointment, I'd get flustered, leave, and realize I've forgotten to ask the question. So I know one of the things I try to do is to write questions down. Mm-hmm. Are there any other tips you could give for patients going to see their dermatologist to make sure they get the most out of that experience?
So writing questions down is very good. Keep a journal or put notes in your phone. 2, even if you forget your questions, make sure you get your doctor's email or the nurse's email or somebody that if you forget, you can email them additional questions. I would have medical records, like if this is your first time going to this new doctor and they're not in the same hospital network as an old doctor, I would make sure ahead of time that you either have your files sent over to that doctor or you have them for yourself. Make sure you list every medicine that you've been on, past and present, so they can see what you have and have not tried and what is worth trying at that point. If you are a woman and you're thinking about having kids in the next couple of years, I would be sure to express that to your doctor, because if they put you on a certain biologic and you decide that you want to get pregnant, you'll have to come out off the biologic. And some biologics you can't get back on once you stop them. So these are all conversations that you need to have with your doctor to basically make the best decision. So make sure you want to talk about that. Yeah. So that's the advice that I probably have a lot more advice, but that's what I can think of right at this moment. So
that's a really good idea. I like that. So instead of turning up to your appointment and you've got your memories of drugs that you've taken and the doctor's got his notes, you've got a comprehensive set of notes of what you've been through, so you can give more specific instructions to the dermatologist.
Exactly.
Yeah. I know I was interviewed a couple of weeks ago and I was asked about my PASI and some of my negative experiences with psoriasis and some of the drugs that I'd been on. And I've been on so many, I couldn't remember what some of them were. So actually, yeah, I'm seeing a lot of value in journaling. And I imagine tracking your symptoms just generally is probably a good idea.
Tracking your symptoms. And there are a few apps now that you can look up in the App Store, whether you have an iPhone or Android, that will help you to track your symptoms as well as take pictures. And so eventually you can kind of see how your disease goes up and down. Was it something that you ate that day that you flared, or was it a certain weather temperature? And so there are apps that can help you with that. So yeah, I would suggest that as well.
I'm aware that you're taking biologics, and quite a lot of the time when you visit your dermatologist, they are very drug heavy, but it is realistic to expect that your dermatologist will talk to you about other ways to manage your skin. It's not just about prescribing drugs. Is that your experience?
So that's the point I wanted to make. I remember now. When you go to your doctor's office, it's best that you also research the current treatment options so that you already know what you do and don't feel comfortable with, and the risk and the side effects and all of that. So with the question of biologic, yeah, I am on a biologic. My doctor is very pro biologic, but she does clinical trials. That's the other thing that I would suggest too when you're looking for a doctor. If you can, get a doctor who is passionate about clinical trials and they participate in clinical trials for psoriasis, because they're going to have an advantage of knowing the mechanics of these drugs and how they truly affect the body. So when I talk to her, she's big on biologics, and she knows which biologics are, I don't want to say safe because there's such a thing, but where the risks are a little bit lower than, compared to something else. So she's very good at that. But I've been to other dermatologists who they don't feel like dealing with the paperwork it takes to get a patient on biologics. So they'll just throw creams at you. Or they might be a doctor who believes in biologics, but because of something called step therapy, which the National Psoriasis Foundation has been advocating to change. Step therapy requires a doctor to prescribe most of the time cheaper medications before the patient is approved for something like a biologic, which is very costly. And so typically these things include creams, they include pills, a lot of times stuff that's not as effective as the biologic. So you end up wasting a lot of time, prolonging getting that patient to a successful treatment that works, which only induces more mental health challenges for the people in the psoriasis community. So there are a lot of different circumstances depending on what type of doctor you're dealing with and just what you have going on personally with your insurance on whether or not they will suggest biologics or just throw some creams at you.
Absolutely. So a lot of it is also to do with the doctor's personality then, isn't it? Like their personal opinions, their attitudes towards various medications and paperwork. In the UK, it's not step therapy, but there is a similar system in place where to get onto a biologic, you normally have to fail at cyclosporin and methotrexate before you're eligible.
Yep. Which is very similar here, especially with the methotrexate. It's very challenging and patients don't realize this either. It's very challenging for doctors because to get someone on a biologic, a lot of times with the step therapy or systems like that, it takes a lot of paperwork, which takes time away from patients because the doctor has to focus on this paperwork. And you think about it, if a doctor has 200 patients that they see in the month, imagine if every patient needed that same type of advocacy where the doctor has to fill out paperwork for them and fight with the insurance company and make phone calls. So it can be a really long, hard process that not only affects the patient, but really affects the doctor as well. So I think that that's definitely a side that patients don't understand with challenges with the medical community.
Okay, I love what you're saying here. So essentially, as patients, we need to know exactly what we want from our dermatologist before we turn up. We need to have a journal where we've logged symptoms, not only physical, but also mental health challenges. And when we're talking about mental health, you don't have to have depression. It can just be feeling low when you get up, feeling down when you're getting dressed, is any kind of thought where psoriasis has affected your day, isn't it? We would class any of these things as a negative mental health situation. So you want to be logging all of that. When you get to your dermatologist, you need to make sure that they are answering your questions properly, and that you push for what you want, and being aware of the side effects of the different drugs that you're interested in, so you can maybe manipulate the conversation is probably not the best way to go about it. But I do know that the dermatologist appointments are quite short, aren't they? And they don't have time to run through all of the side effects.
Right. Yeah. So that's why you have to advocate for yourself. So it takes you doing your own research and then bringing this information to the table, almost like a business meeting. Before you get to that business meeting, you do your own research, you look up stuff, you put something together, and then you and your business partner comes to the table and say, look, this is what I found. These are my ideas. This is how I feel. Now, what's your input? And so that's how a patient who wants a successful doctor appointment and to get the best results out of it, that's what you should do.
So you could turn up having clear success criteria, for example. So you're not going to leave the doctor's office until you've achieved like 3 things, just as you would in a business meeting.
Right. Exactly. Whether that's a refill, whether that's talking about new symptoms, or whether that's saying, hey, I need a new treatment. What are we going to do? I love that. Create 3 objectives, checklists that are tangible, that you can carry with you, that you want completed by the time you leave that doctor's appointment.
And I love what you said earlier about getting some contact information, like an email address, just in case when you walk away, you've still got some questions. That's a really, really good tip. Okay, so there's one other thing that I wanted to talk to you about, and that's purely because I've been reading some of your blogs this week, and you were talking about the camp that you went on last week. So this is nothing to do with the dermatologist thing. I just really loved the idea of, so it's a camp for children suffering from skin conditions, and they all go away together for a week. Is that right?
Yes. So the camp is called Camp Discovery. It's sponsored through the American Academy of Dermatology. They do 8 different camps starting in June. Each camp is 1 week. And yes, we have kids between the ages of 8 to 16, and they're all living with some type of skin condition, including psoriasis. So I've been volunteering with the camp for the last 3 summers. So yeah.
That's amazing. I wish there'd been something like that when I was a child. I would have loved to have gone and met other people, because it's only this last year I've actually started to meet real people who've got the same problems as me.
It's beautiful. And a lot of these camps, so they do different camps in different states, but it's all under the same umbrella. They've been around for 25 years, and I'm 31. So they definitely was around when I was younger. Never had heard of it. So now every chance I get, if I meet a parent that has a child with a skin condition, I tell them about that camp. The camp is 100% free to families. Wow. You don't have to pay for anything. They fly the kids in, or if you're close enough, you can drive your child in, and all they have to do is bring clothes. They are fed. They have activities. It's a beautiful experience.
That's amazing. So if there's anyone listening who is thinking about sending their child, what do they need to do?
So you can go to the American Academy of Dermatology, which is aad.org, and just search for Camp Discovery. Or if you go to Google, you can just say Camp Discovery AAD, and the camp will pop up, and you can apply.
Okay, fantastic. Now, we're running to time, but I just wanted to add one last thing. So in your experience, as part of being an advocate and writing online on Twitter and blogging, you found it easier to find your voice and talk about your experience. Is that something that you would recommend to everyone with psoriasis?
I wouldn't recommend it to everyone, because everyone is different. And even with me right now, like, I'm this advocate and I can talk very well about psoriasis, and I love answering questions. But honestly, if I was 90% covered, I probably would still have a hard time going to the pool and feeling comfortable. I might do it, but I would still have an issue with it. So my point is saying that is everybody is doing differently emotionally and mentally with this disease. If you don't have the confidence to go on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram to talk about your disease, that's fine. You can do it in other ways. Start with an online support group that's private, that has people that look just like you, that you know for a fact you're not going to be bullied or teased or even have a risk of coming in contact with that kind of stuff. I will, of course, suggest that you share your story, that you put it out there so people can get a better understanding. But if you're not comfortable with going to Twitter and blogging about it right away, that's okay. One day at a time, one step at a time. You telling a stranger about your condition can be just as helpful as somebody doing a blog online, because regardless, you're educating someone. So the advice that I would give is do what you're most comfortable with, and gradually you'll become comfortable to do bigger things. So just take it one day at a time and just do the best you can in the moment.
Okay, that's great. I was just thinking in terms of some people do find it really hard when they're talking to their doctors, perhaps talking then, just practicing talking about their skin to a close friend to start off with, just to get used to releasing maybe some of the frustrations and emotions they've been holding back. So that's what you're saying, isn't it? Start small and then in a safe space and go from there.
When I first started blogging, I used it as a safety net, because in my mind, I could write what I wanted on the computer, close it, and go on about my day. I didn't have to be confronted with the possible rude comments that I thought I was going to get. And then eventually I did a little bit of that. And then I'm like, oh, okay, well, now I can do video, or now I can go speak to people, or now I can do, podcasts about psoriasis. So it started out really small, but the more I did it and the little steps I took, the more confident I became with talking about my condition. So I hope that provides encouragement to other people out there. Just start small.
Okay, I love that. Right, thank you very much. That's been very, very valuable. What's the best place for people to find you if they want to see more?
So you can find me at Alisha M. Bridges on virtually anything. So that's ALISHAM Bridges, BRIDGES. And then, of course, you can check out my blog, beingmeandmyown.skin.com. But I'm on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Alisha M. Bridges.
Fantastic. And I'll put the links to that in the show notes. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a beautiful conversation, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing in the psoriasis community, not only for the UK, but the US too. So thank you so much for being international with your advocacy.
Right back at you. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed our interview today with Alisha. We touched on a large number of topics, and some of these we're following up in more detail in episode 11 with consultant dermatologist John Golding. We're going to talk about how you can go about getting a new dermatologist if relationships have broken down. We talk in more detail about mental health support and the reasons why we have to access methotrexate before we move on to biologics. So make sure you click on subscribe so you don't miss that episode. And for show notes and the links to get hold of Alisha, if you'd like to follow her on social media, you can head over to thisscientistsays.com/episode 9. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.